Anyway, we're going to talk music now. I'm in the company of two men who have music on the brain, Professor Stephen Frucht and Tim Lynch. You're very welcome to the John Murray Show, and
Morning,
it's
John.
nice to have you along. We also have a Lunas with us as well, so we'll be hearing from them in a moment. I'm surrounded by an assortment of different instruments. But to you first, Stephen, you're a neurologist and you're speaking this evening at a very unusual event about music and the brain. Irish neurologist Tim Lynch, you've helped organise the event. But what exactly, Stephen, just explain where you're coming from when it comes to the study of this area.
So I think our idea for this event was to highlight the fascinating area of what neurology can teach us about music and what music can teach us about neurology in the brain and the interplay between the two. Certainly the idea of what makes talent and what makes elite performance is something that's fascinated neurologists.
And is it your simple view that when it comes to the top musicians, that the skills that they have, they're born with them rather than created by them as they
I think
progress
it's
through
both.
life?
I think there is something called innate talent, but it's pretty clear that it has to be developed and nurtured, probably early in life and then throughout, and that the brain is very plastic, continues to learn even in adulthood.
Yeah, Tim, tell us about what's happening at the National Concert Hall tonight.
Well, it's kind of an outreach or connected to our major meeting we have this week in Dublin, which is the 16th International Congress of Parkinson's Disease and Other Movement Disorders, which is a long-winded way of saying we're interested in brain and movement. And I thought, as we were setting this up, which is a big meeting with over 5,000 delegates at it, it'd be nice that we did a little bit of interaction with, I suppose, the population out there, rather than just boring, nerdy neurologists talking together. There would be some cultural link, and also that we would sort of discuss brain and brain function and as how Stephen says, how you can remodel your brain. So this actually is part of the Dublin City of Science event, which Dublin is a City of Science this year in 2012. And they felt this was entirely appropriate that we would discuss the neuroscience of music. And if you listen or play or want to understand music, I think it's an interesting concert because, as Stephen highlighted, if you learn an instrument, you change your brain. You remodel it, you re-sculpture it, you develop new connections and synapses to be able to, whatever instrument you pick up. So it's kind of an interesting concept that your brain is not just fixed when you're born. You can sort of mush it around a bit. And we know teachers do that already, for example. That's what they do.
Yeah.
But you have to do it right. And I always use the term, it's like Goldilocks. You have to do it just right.
Just right.
So there's a sort of a 10,000-hour rule that Stephen was referring to, which is if you may have the innate talent or inherited talent, but to take advantage of it, you have to practice a lot. And I think the Beatles are the best example of that. They got stuck in that place in Berlin for about 2 or 3 years, nightclub, and they played hours on end together. So they became they knew exactly what each of them were doing.
So they did their 10,000 hours.
They did, yeah.
Go on, Tim.
But they did it just right. If you do it wrong, and then Stephen's going to refer to that, you can end up with problems, as in music dystonia, different types. So you either play incorrectly or overplay, that you end up with a problem of control of movement. You've actually potentially remodeled the brain, I suppose, incorrectly or possibly excessively, so that when you want to, say, move your finger correctly, you can't filter the control of brain control down to it correctly, so it moves incorrectly.
So everything in moderation, as they say.
Yes.
Balance is needed. Stephen, take us back. How did human music start?
Well, this is, as you'll see tonight if you come, this is something that's hardwired into the animal kingdom, going back even to parrots and elephants and etc. But human music goes back easily in the archaeologic record 80 to 100,000 years, and probably developed from a precursor to language. If you look at primates and how they communicate.
It came before talk, in other words.
It came before talk. In fact, language probably latched on to music as a means of communication in the animal kingdom, for attracting a mate or communicating with a foe or sounding an alarm for your mates.
So everything was a musical at the very
I
outset
think so.
before we started talking. So life was a whole musical in terms of communicating.
I think that's right.
And it evolved over time.
Yeah.
And how did it evolve over time?
Well, we don't know. It's a guess, but it's certainly from the anthropologic record that you can date back traditional flutes to 35 to 50,000 years that still play wonderfully. So if you think about the amount of effort that went into making this from an animal's bone and then tuning it, it had to have had a very important cultural significance to bind a community together.
Right. And does music exist in all cultures around the world?
I think it's present everywhere, but it partially depends how you define music.
Yeah.
If you define it as sound interacting between people, which is probably as good a definition as you can, yes, it does exist everywhere.
Right, in different levels and
Yes.
different degrees and different types of music. And how does listening to music then change behaviour?
Well, this is something that's fascinated early intervention, childhood therapists, etc., with the, quote, Mozart effect, and that's been a topic of some controversy. But clearly, many of us listen to our favorite music as sort of a background to focus our attention, not too much or we get too involved, but it certainly has profound effects. People have used it in the intensive care units to reduce the amount of pain medicine and other sedation that's needed. So it's clear it has a central effect that's quite profound.
And I'm also aware of the research that says cows produce more milk, Tim, listening to music. Is that the case?
I've heard that. Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly. Whether it's classical or modern music, I don't know. But your question earlier is interesting. I mean, I can work away when I have classical music in the background, but when I don't have modern music, I find it difficult. So there's something interesting about the rhythm of that. And indeed, I suppose Irish music, as we're about to hear, would be similar. It can sometimes be very relaxing. So music is certainly an auditory component. It's emotional, but there's a motor aspect to it. So if you think about it, when they're going to play, you're going to find your foot's going to start tapping. And you're not going to know why your foot's starting tapping. You suddenly realize, well, my foot is tapping. You think about it, but your brain is on that at an automatic level of motor control, which is really how people play music. If I think often if they think too much about the melody, as we were discussing earlier, and forget the rhythm, they often go into an automatic motion of playing it. In the same way as when to hit a good putt in golf, you have to do it automatically, or a good serve in tennis. You've got to let your brain, the automatic centre of movement, to do it. If you overthink it, you jab it and miss it.
Yeah. So in some ways then half listening to music isn't sufficient for that effect to happen.
I'm not so sure on that. From my viewpoint, certainly if I've got, say, a preparation of a talk or a speech or something, I could be quite happy having, say, classical music or good Irish music in the background, and I don't find it interferes with my cognitive work otherwise. But it depends on that music. If it's not that, I think I can continue. So I suppose that maybe I'm multitasking, which I'm not meant to do with the Y chromosome, but I must be doing it.
And Stephen, you work a lot with top musicians, and you are one indeed. What distinguishes them from the ordinary mortals, the ordinary musicians?
Well, I think a lot of it is probably innate. And I think that there's something that isn't realized is that people who play on the very highest levels have to have a superior intelligence. Most of these people, when you talk to them, they say, well, I was interested in science, I was interested in math, I was interested in English and literature and history, but I chose to focus on music. So it's a question of focus, but they're also highly intelligent, often creative, excellent memories, interaction, situational awareness, and the ability to sustain attention on a singular task over years.
Give us a few examples of the people you would single out.
Within the
genius.
within the 20th century, people like Glenn Gould or Michael Rabin, Jascha Heifetz, Horowitz. These are people, obviously, who were supremely gifted, but also willing to put the time in and to focus, with sort of relentlessly focus on the development of the craft.
And are they the sort of people, you mentioned their innate intelligence and their brilliance, are they the sort of people who, if they turn their mind to anything, they'd succeed at it? The people who drive us mad, basically people who are good at everything.
I think it's hard to know, but there's a history of people who had multiple talents like this. For example, Fritz Kreisler was a great violinist of the first half of the 20th century, but he was also a wonderful pianist, and he was also a physician who just decided after the war, he'd go, spend his time playing the violin. And there are other examples of these sort of genius talents who just decided to focus on one area.
Now, one of the areas of study, and we have Lunasa here this morning, one of the things that we're hoping to achieve with tonight's performance, and I think, Stephen, you've already heard a bit of Lunasa, is the difference in the brain makeup of classically trained musicians and folk or traditional musicians. I'm looking at you lads now. I'm not making any observations about the size of your brains or anything, but is there room for study here, Tim?
Well, I think so. We were discussing it earlier, actually. And Sean, Kevin decided that Killian, the uilleann pipe player, has got a different brain than anybody else.
We'll ask you about that in a
They
minute.
think it's split down the middle, so his right side doesn't know what his left side's doing.
I see.
But I think it's interesting, obviously. Is there... what's the difference? I mean, if you think it, and I unfortunately don't play music, so I'm the ignorant person commenting here. But a trad player, we're discussing it, will often pick up a tune and they will strum and get the right note, and away they go, and they will remember the tune perhaps from a motor memory perspective. They've played this over and over again, so that automatic centre of movement up there has got this sort of innate plugged into it. Whereas Stephen, who also plays violin, will remember me from having read the piece, what's E flat, for example, and pick it up and take it from there. So I imagine that, and it's been an interesting study to do, that a classic player may end up bringing in this language centre, which is usually on the left side of the brain. There's a mathematical component to music, very much so, and so the mathematical component comes in addition to the motor memory area. Whereas trad perhaps might be using more of the motor memory, and the other areas would be used less. Right. So it would be an interesting study to do.
Okay, well, we're going to hear from, we'll talk to you in a moment, lads, but we're going to see you at work now, see what class of brains you have at this time of the morning. Here's Lunasa now with, am I right, Caliana? Caliana. Right, lads, off you go. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Now, Stephen, you're watching with great interest. I think you heard them practicing, the lads practicing earlier. What do you make of what you see here in front of you and the way they're playing their instruments?
Well, they're just wonderful. I think, it's one thing to play just what's written on the page, but in a sense it's a higher order thing to have the plan for what the tune or the piece is, and then to create it on the spot, in the moment. Mm-hmm. It's a different order of creativity.
Yeah, it is indeed. And come to you first, Kevin Crawford from Lunasa. You're involved in this project. What do you make of it all? What the lads?
Fascinating. I mean, we were delighted to be invited to take part in it first and foremost, and getting the opportunity to meet both Stephen and Tim this morning. We've had a little bit of an insight into perhaps more than we had previously known as to what's going to take place tonight. But I mean, it's a fascinating subject. We do have a kind of a Fritz in our own band here, with Sean Smith being a doctor and a fiddle player as well. So it's nice when you made that kind of comparison.
Yes.
Sean tells us that he's superior to us all the time. So you've just confirmed that.
Not only is he a fiddle player, but he's a GP as well.
He is a GP. But I mean, from our own perspective, I mean, music is very important, of course, and we've done our 10,000 hours. Most of them yesterday, rehearsing for the gig tonight with the RTE Concert Orchestra. So, I mean, we find it very therapeutic, and we find it kind of very good way of expressing ourselves and all that type of
you're well able to do that. And Sean, being the GP, I just wonder now, when you're dealing with patients, would you ever suggest to somebody coming into you that perhaps what you need to do is go for a walk, put on your iPod and listen to some nice, gentle
Absolutely,
music?
all the time. I think it's very important to look at non-medication type treatments for patients in many different spheres, and definitely with all that's going on in the world at the moment, a lot of time it's definitely lifestyle and getting stimulation from other parts.
And would you sorry to interrupt you, would you recommend any particular type of music to them? Apart from the Lunasa CDs.
Definitely, I mean, we'd be looking, there'd be certain types of treatments that you'd look at the Sleeve Lucas style of music for. And no, you wouldn't. You would definitely, what suits the patient themselves, really. I mean, music by itself, whatever, people have their own tastes, and as Tim was saying there, you find music that you can work along with, some that you find stimulating, and you definitely see what they enjoy and encourage that, really.
Yeah. Killian, I can see you there with Stephen was particularly impressed with you and your pipe playing. This particular project, I mean, does what you're hearing this morning tally with your own idea of what you're actually creating when you're playing that instrument?
In terms of the pipes?
Yes, indeed.
I mean, well, there was a funny discussion earlier. The boys were wondering whether you had to be half mad to play the pipes, or after 10 years of playing the pipes you become half mad.
Why is that?
Well, I suppose it's a difficult instrument. You're using all these parts of your body. The instrument is always fighting against you. You know, the reeds are always going in and out of tune. So you're constantly frustrated, and it's kind of one step forward, two steps back a lot of the time. So I suppose after a number of years of playing that, I definitely think there's little things start to appear in your brain and other things start to go out.
So you're like the goalkeeper, I'm just thinking, in soccer, are you? That the rest of the team are sort of gathered round and you're back, between the posts, doing your own thing.
First to be blamed if anything goes wrong.
A little bit eccentric. Is that the view of Killian, is it? Everybody's nodding in agreement.
We're definitely hoping that Stephen can enlighten us with what goes on in the minds of the pipers, definitely.
There might be a book in it. But Stephen, I suppose there is a serious side to this, and people who pursue excellence in music, and some who find themselves with dystonia, and you also do a lot of work with that. And have you got to the bottom of it, exactly what happens with those particular
Well, so dystonia is a neurologic disorder that Tim and I and others here at the conference are interested in. We see a lot of patients who have this who aren't musicians. It's a disorder where a part of the body is involved with involuntary movements that tend to be sustained and twisting. And there are various forms, genetic forms, toxin-induced, drug-induced, etc. From my own background, I ended up seeing a fair number of musicians in New York. There's a lot of musicians in the New York area, or they come in. And so we've set up a program called Musicians with Dystonia about 12 years ago as part of the Dystonia Medical Research Foundation to raise awareness of this and to focus attention and research on this very unusual problem that some musicians develop. It's pretty clear that there are some genetic contributions, the work of Christine Klein and others here in Europe, but there are also environmental factors that sort of can trigger this condition.
And one of our texters, Paul, wants to know, is it incurable?
Dystonia as a whole is often quite treatable, and in musicians, I think in the past there was a sense that there were not treatments that were really effective, and I think that's changed quite a bit. Certainly the use of botulinum toxin and other approaches, and we'll have quite a number of videos tonight, and I'll show some of those examples of patients who've been returned to playing form. Many have had to change their careers or change what they play, but there's a lot of hope in that.
That's good. That's good news anyway. Matthew Nugent, wine consultant, says Gregorian chant by the monks at Glenstal Abbey is constantly played in a special wine room at Vina Montes in Chile to help their best wines mature. There you are. So the people who taste the wines obviously are conscious of the input from the monks at Glenstal. Well, the event takes place tonight. It's called Lunasa and the Brain, and it features Lunasa, of course, the RTE Concert Orchestra and conductor David Brophy, and the guest speaker, Professor Stephen Frucht. Thank you for coming in this morning.
Sure,
and
thank you.
Thank you to neurologist Tim Lynch as well. And it all take place. It's part, as Tim said, of Dublin City of Science 2012, and more details can be had at rte.ie/CO. So lads, before you go, will you exercise your brains again and play another track for us?
Thanks a million. That's great, John. We're going to play a mixed match set of tunes which we call the Ravens Rock, and if I could just mention that we're playing in Ennis on Thursday as part of the Love Live music event, and along with the Kilfenora Cayley Band and Mara O'Connell and Martin Hayes, and then we're down in Cork on Thursday, the White Horse Sessions.
Great stuff.
Thank you.
That's done. So Kevin, Killian, Sean, Ed and Trevor, also known as Lunasa, off you go, lads.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 2.
I'll tell you, you wouldn't hear any Italians doing that. And Tim in Wicklow says, what a beautiful piece of Irish music, just the ticket to replenish our spirits after the defeats in Poland. This tune reinforces our strengths that lie in the arts and culture, or whatever, where truly you'll never beat the Irish. Lads, thanks a million, and enjoy tonight at the concert hall, and thanks again to Tim and to Stephen.
Thanks, John.
Text